She thought she built the perfect life, a career she earned, a home she paid for, and a marriage she trusted. But on the night meant to celebrate new beginnings, Peggy came home to find her aging parents locked outside in the cold, while her in-laws threw a lavish party inside her house. What began as humiliation turned into betrayal, danger, and a war for survival. Now she must fight for her parents, dignity, her home, and her freedom. Because some battles aren't about love or loyalty. They're about drawing the line before everything you are is erased. A story of betrayal, boundaries, and rebirth. Watch as one woman reclaims her house, her power, and her life. Don't just witness her fight, feel it. My name is Peggy. I'm 35 years old, a senior marketing executive, and the kind of person who always believed I could balance everything: career, marriage, family. I thought I had built a life that honored the people who raised me while still carving space for who I wanted to become. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the moment I pulled into my own driveway, stepped out of the car, and found my parents shivering on the front porch, locked out of my house. They were in their Sunday best, still smiling faintly, as if trying to convince themselves this was just a momentary glitch, a misunderstanding. My mother clutched her handbag in both hands like a lifeline. My father sat on the top step, hunched forward slightly, rubbing his chest in that familiar, terrifying way that I'd come to recognize far too well since his heart surgery. But what seared into my brain, what I will never forget, was the color of their lips. Blue. Not figuratively. Literally blue. And inside that house I had worked my entire life to afford. My in-laws were hosting a cocktail party. I could hear laughter, see flickering lights through the window, silhouettes moving past the door like ghosts at a masquerade. None of them saw my parents. Or worse, maybe they did, and simply didn't care. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Let me back up. My parents, Walter and Diane, are in their 70s. They are humble, generous, old school to a fault. My dad worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. Janitor by day, night security guard by night. He never once complained. My mom could stretch $1 like a magician. We didn't have much, but they made sure I never felt it. When I got into college, they drained their only savings account to help cover what my scholarship didn't. They cheered me through every exam, every late-night call from campus, every little victory. When I landed my first real job and mailed them my first business card, my dad framed it. It's still on their refrigerator, faded and proud. 8 months ago, Dad had a triple bypass. It scared me more than anything ever had. He recovered steadily, but it meant constant monitoring, daily meds, no stress, and no cold weather exposure. My mom's arthritis, meanwhile, had gotten so bad that even opening a door was difficult. I knew this. I had planned for this. That's why when Robert and I bought our first house, a quaint, classic Tudor just 15 minutes from my childhood home, I made sure it had a guest suite on the ground floor. For them. Always for them. Robert, my husband of 5 years. On paper, he seemed perfect. Successful, charming, supportive, or so I thought. But looking back, I see now how the warning signs were always there. His parents, Nancy and Walter, never liked me. They never liked us, really. They tolerated me like one might tolerate traffic on the way to something more important. And now, on the very night meant to celebrate our new home, they had transformed it into something unrecognizable. They had taken over my kitchen, my living room, my front porch, and worst of all, they had left my aging parents outside in the cold, alone, forgotten. I stood frozen for a moment on the front walk, my breath visible in the chilly autumn air. The house was glowing from within, buzzing with music and laughter. I could see someone clinking glasses in my dining room, glasses I hadn't bought, trays I hadn't set, faces I didn't know. A valet had tried to wave me off earlier, asking if I was with the Cunningham event. But this wasn't the Cunningham event. This was my house. This was supposed to be my night. And now my parents were freezing. My father's lips were blue. Something inside me snapped. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a battle. A battle for my house. A battle for my marriage. A battle for my parents' dignity, and eventually for my own. And I was ready to fight. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back now, I see it all so clearly. The red flags, the subtle shifts, the way I twisted myself into knots, trying to explain away what my gut had been screaming all along. But back then, I was in love. And when you're in love, you don't just overlook warning signs. You rationalize them. You polish them until they look like something else. Quirks, stress, culture clash, anything but what they really are. I met Robert at a marketing conference in Austin. We were both keynote speakers, both ambitious, both sharp. His smile was effortless, his ideas were clever, and when he asked me to coffee after the panel, I felt like I was saying yes to possibility. From the beginning, he seemed impressed by my work ethic. He listened intently when I talked about growing up in a working-class family and putting myself through college. He said I was grounded, real, refreshing, as though ambition was something rare and endearing in women, not threatening. We married within a year. Fast, maybe, but it felt right. Robert was charming, attentive, and eager to build a future with me, or so I thought. The first cracks came not in our marriage, but around it, specifically from his parents, Nancy and Walter Cunningham. At our engagement party, they arrived in matching designer outfits, walking into my parents' modest home like royalty, visiting a peasant village. Nancy smiled tightly as she glanced around, then leaned in to whisper, "It's charming that your parents still live so simply. It must build character." She said it like she was giving me a compliment. I told myself she was just being awkward. Later that night, Walter asked my dad about his retirement plans. When my father mentioned his modest pension, Walter smirked. "You should have diversified. Mutual funds, at least," he said, sipping his imported scotch. "But I suppose not everyone's financially literate." Again, I laughed it off. "They're from a different world," I told myself. "They don't mean to be rude. They just don't know better." But they did, and Robert never stepped in, never corrected them. Instead, he'd say, "They're just trying to help," or "Don't take it personally. Mother has strong opinions." The wedding planning was worse. They inserted themselves into every decision: venue, flowers, menu. Nancy even vetoed my choice of bouquet. "Wildflowers are too informal for a proper wedding," she told me, plucking the sample from my hand. "Let me handle it, dear. I know what photographs well." I expected Robert to push back. Instead, he said, "Let her have this. She's always dreamed of planning her son's wedding." I should have seen it then, how easily he defaulted to them, how conflict-averse he really was. But I was busy juggling a new promotion, RSVPs, and seating charts. I didn't have the bandwidth to fight over centerpieces. So I gave in. Again. And again. After the honeymoon, things settled. Briefly. We bought a small condo, and for a while, it was cozy. Robert would make Sunday pancakes. We visited my parents for dinner. He even seemed to enjoy it, bringing my dad his favorite coffee, fixing a leaky faucet for my mom. It gave me hope. But as my career took off, something shifted. When I landed a major pharmaceutical account and earned a big promotion, I came home beaming with champagne in hand. Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I'll have to step up my game to keep up with you," he said flatly, setting down his glass barely touched. I laughed it off. "Let's use the bonus for a house," I offered. "A real one, with a guest room for my parents." He agreed almost too quickly. But within hours, he was on the phone with his parents. That weekend, they arrived with real estate printouts for neighborhoods we could barely afford. When I pushed for something more modest, Nancy laid a manicured hand on mine and said, "This is why generational wealth matters, Peggy. You think small because that's what you know." I smiled politely. Then I excused myself and cried in the bathroom. We ended up buying a Tudor-style home just inside their suggested zip code. I paid 70% of the down payment. Robert asked me not to tell them that. "They'll assume I'm doing fine," he said. "Why disappoint them?" I wanted to believe he was right. I wanted to believe we were building something together, that the little compromises were temporary. But the compromises became patterns, and the patterns became warning signs. When we moved in, Nancy brought a decorator without asking. Walter questioned whether we should knock down walls for entertaining flow. Robert nodded along. When I said no, they acted like I was irrational. "It's just a suggestion," Nancy said. "Don't be so defensive." They treated me like a tenant in my own home. And Robert, he just stood there, silent, smiling, always choosing peace over principle. And I kept choosing to explain it away. until the night of the housewarming when everything snapped. They inserted themselves into every decision: venue, flowers, menu. Nancy even vetoed my choice of bouquet. "Wildflowers are too informal for a proper wedding," she told me, plucking the sample from my hand. "Let me handle it, dear. I know what photographs well." I expected Robert to push back. Instead, he said, "Let her have this. She's always dreamed of planning her son's wedding." I should have seen it then, how easily he defaulted to them, how conflict-averse he really was. But I was busy juggling a new promotion, RSVPs, and seating charts. I didn't have the bandwidth to fight over centerpieces. So I gave in. Again. And again. After the honeymoon, things settled. Briefly. We bought a small condo, and for a while, it was cozy. Robert would make Sunday pancakes. We visited my parents for dinner. He even seemed to enjoy it, bringing my dad his favorite coffee, fixing a leaky faucet for my mom. It gave me hope. But as my career took off, something shifted. When I landed a major pharmaceutical account and earned a big promotion, I came home beaming with champagne in hand. Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I'll have to step up my game to keep up with you," he said flatly, setting down his glass barely touched. I laughed it off. "Let's use the bonus for a house," I offered. "A real one, with a guest room for my parents." He agreed almost too quickly. But within hours, he was on the phone with his parents. That weekend, they arrived with real estate printouts for neighborhoods we could barely afford. When I pushed for something more modest, Nancy laid a manicured hand on mine and said, "This is why generational wealth matters, Peggy. You think small because that's what you know." I smiled politely. Then I excused myself and cried in the bathroom. We ended up buying a Tudor-style home just inside their suggested zip code. I paid 70% of the down payment. Robert asked me not to tell them that. "They'll assume I'm doing fine," he said. "Why disappoint them?" I wanted to believe he was right. I wanted to believe we were building something together, that the little compromises were temporary. But the compromises became patterns, and the patterns became warning signs. When we moved in, Nancy brought a decorator without asking. Walter questioned whether we should knock down walls for entertaining flow. Robert nodded along. When I said no, they acted like I was irrational. "It's just a suggestion," Nancy said. "Don't be so defensive." They treated me like a tenant in my own home. And Robert, he just stood there, silent, smiling, always choosing peace over principle. And I kept choosing to explain it away, until the night of the housewarming when everything snapped. Before I could say more, Nancy approached, eyeing the autumnal decorations I'd carefully placed around the living room, handmade centerpieces my mom and I created together. She smiled tightly. "These are charming," she said, lifting one off the coffee table like it was a used tissue, "but I brought some more suitable arrangements. Don't worry. We'll elevate the ambiance." She snapped her fingers, and Walter carried in towering floral displays, each more garish than the last. Within the next hour, our home was transformed, and not in the way I had envisioned. Furniture was rearranged without asking. Our modest wine bottles were shoved under the bar cart to make room for imported vintages. Family photos vanished, replaced by abstract art pieces I'd never seen. Servers arrived, yes, actual servers in black and white uniforms, setting up a buffet table with catering I hadn't ordered. I stood by helplessly as trays of my father's dietary-safe foods were pushed aside for foie gras and seared scallops. I couldn't find my voice. I kept thinking, this isn't happening. They can't actually be doing this in my house, in my home. But they were. Robert? He disappeared into the background, giving tours to guests, laughing with Walter, clinking glasses with strangers. He never once checked in with me. The final straw came when I overheard Nancy speaking to a woman in a diamond choker. She gestured around the living room and said, "Robert always belonged in this neighborhood. Of course, we'll need to upgrade the kitchen if they plan to start a family. And the guest suite, much better as a library." The guest suite. The one I specifically chose for my parents. Something in me went still. This wasn't about a party. This wasn't even about overstepping. This was a takeover. I found Robert changing into an even more formal shirt. I asked him directly, "Why didn't you tell me they were planning this?" He shrugged. "It's just a party, Peggy. They wanted to help. These people could be important for us." "For us?" I repeated. "Or for them?" Before he could answer, Nancy appeared again, like she always did, pulling him away mid-conversation. Someone needed to meet Senator Wilson's assistant, apparently. And just like that, he left me standing there, alone, surrounded by strangers, in the house I paid for, during the party I never wanted. For the first time, I felt like a guest in my own life. And something told me this was only the beginning. By the time I left to pick up my parents, the sky was already turning that dusky orange that makes autumn evenings feel cinematic. Beautiful, but fleeting. The kind of twilight that whispers, "You're running out of time." I hadn't seen Robert in nearly an hour. The last time we spoke, I reminded him, firmly, that my parents were arriving soon, and they needed certain accommodations. Dad's medication in the fridge, Mom's special seat with a cushion. He waved me off, distracted, half listening. Sure, he said, not even looking up from his conversation with Walter's colleague about hedge fund returns. As I drove, I tried to shake off the growing pit in my stomach. I told myself it would all be fine, that my parents would smile through the chaos, that Robert would pull it together, that we could still salvage the night. They were waiting on their porch when I pulled up. My mother wore a lavender scarf I'd given her last Christmas, carefully styled around her freshly done hair. My father wore his navy sweater, the one I bought him the year he retired. They both looked proud, excited, unaware. "The house all ready for the big reveal?" Dad grinned as I helped Mom into the car. "It looks wonderful," I lied. But as we turned onto our street, I knew something was wrong. The neighborhood looked like a valet lot. BMWs and black Escalades lined the curb. A young man in a tuxedo vest stood at the edge of our driveway, clipboard in hand. "Evening, ma'am. Are you here for the Cunningham dinner?" I blinked. "This is my house." He blushed and stepped aside, letting us pull into a cramped spot near the garage. As I helped my father from the car, he leaned heavily on me. The temperature had dropped fast. Their jackets, meant for a short walk indoors, were no match for the chilly wind now picking up speed. I led them to the front door and rang the bell. No answer. I rang again, knocked harder. Through the beveled glass, I could see silhouettes gliding past. They saw us. I knew they did. But no one came. "Maybe they can't hear over the music," my mom offered, pulling her scarf tighter. Her lips trembled slightly. I pulled out my key only to find that it no longer worked. My key to my house. A cold panic bloomed in my chest. "Let me call Robert," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Voicemail. Again, I texted. "We're outside. The door is locked. My key doesn't work. Dad needs to come in now." 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Dad tried to wave off my concern, claiming he was just winded, but I could see it. The pallor creeping across his face. The way he was pressing his hand to his chest, discreetly, like he always did when the pain started. My mother was shivering now. Her hands trembled as she tried to rub warmth into his. I couldn't wait anymore. "Come with me," I told Mom, leading her around the side of the house. I figured maybe the back door was open, or at least someone would have the decency to listen. But when we reached the patio, my breath caught in my throat. Our backyard, once quiet and humble, had been transformed into a glowing outdoor lounge. Heat lamps, string lights, high-end champagne flutes, and at the center of it all, Nancy. She was holding court like a queen, surrounded by guests laughing at her every word. I knocked on the back door. A young server in a white shirt approached, frowning. "Entrance is around front," he said flatly. "My parents are freezing," I said. "My father has a heart condition. Let me in." He looked back, unsure. That's when Nancy turned and saw me. Her expression fell. She came to the door but didn't open it. "Peggy," she said through the glass, "I thought Robert explained. We had to make some adjustments to the guest list. This is a very important dinner." "Open the door," I said, my voice low and firm. "My parents are outside. It's freezing. My dad needs his medication." She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "Perhaps you could take them to dinner somewhere else. We should be done by 11. I stared at her in stunned silence. 11? This wasn't miscommunication. This was malice, dressed in pearls and served with wine. I left without another word and returned to the front. My dad was slumped forward now. Mom was trying to rub warmth into his hands, but she looked pale and frightened. A neighbor approached with a blanket. Is everything okay? She asked gently. I wanted to scream, no, but instead I thanked her, wrapping the blanket around my mother's shoulders. And then I made a decision. Desperation took over. I circled the house until I found it, a small, half-open basement window. I didn't hesitate. I shoved it open and crawled through, tearing my shirt, scraping my arms, twisting my ankle on the landing. I didn't care. I sprinted upstairs and threw open the front door. Gasps echoed from the living room as I guided my father inside, his face pale, his breath shallow. I sat him on the couch, moved aside for cocktail tables, and rushed to the kitchen. I dug through trays of overpriced hors d'oeuvre until I found his meds in the fridge, right where I left them. I gave him the pills. Watched the color slowly return to his face. My mother's hands finally stopped shaking. And then I felt them. The stairs. The party had gone silent. Nancy approached, wineglass in hand, her expression tight. What is the meaning of this intrusion? I turned to face her. This is my house, I said, and you locked my parents out. Her jaw clenched. There was clearly a miscommunication. No, I said, there was a line, and you just crossed it. The moment my father clutched his chest and gasped, Chest hurts. Everything else vanished, the guests, the music, the cold fury simmering beneath my skin. All I saw was his face, gray, contorted with pain, and my mother's trembling hands trying to steady him. I dropped to my knees beside him. Dad, look at me. Stay with me. He couldn't speak. He just squeezed my hand the same way he used to when I was a little girl afraid of thunder. My voice was shaking as I called 911. My father has a cardiac history. He's pale, cold, disoriented. Possible hypothermia, possible heart event. Please, we need help. Around me, guests hovered, unsure whether to intervene or retreat into their wine glasses. I caught snippets of conversation. Is this part of the party? Do you think we should go? I told you it was too cold today. Nancy stood frozen, arms crossed, as if my father's pain was somehow offensive. This is not a good time, she hissed at Robert, who had finally emerged from the kitchen. You're embarrassing us in front of Senator Wilson's aide. That's when I lost it. I spun around, voice raised, not for effect, but because I had to be heard. My father could be dying because you left him out in the cold like a stray dog. Do you understand that? He could die. Walter scoffed. Now see here, young lady, let's not get hysterical. He's just a little winded. Robert muttered, let's move this somewhere more private. No, I snapped. We're done pretending. This is not a social faux pas. This is elder neglect. You locked him out, you changed the locks, and you ignored my calls while he sat on your steps turning blue. The paramedics arrived just then, pushing through the crowd with practiced urgency. They took one look at my father and moved fast, checking vitals, administering oxygen, bundling him into a stretcher. He's exhibiting signs of mild hypothermia and cardiac distress, one of them told me. We're taking him in. I'm coming with, I said. No, you need to, Robert started. I said, I'm going with my parents. I didn't even look at him. My mother gripped my arm as we rode in the back of the ambulance. She was silent, but I could feel her shaking, not just from the cold, but from shock. I wrapped my coat around her shoulders and held her hand. When we reached the ER, they moved fast. My father was rushed in for observation. My mother was given blankets and a recliner next to his bed. A nurse offered me coffee. I declined. I was too nauseated with anger. A doctor came in an hour later. His body temperature dropped dangerously low, he said. With his cardiac history, that's a serious risk. We're going to monitor him overnight. We're stabilizing him, but this was not a minor episode. I nodded, too numb to cry. My phone buzzed. It was Robert. Are you coming home soon? He asked. My father is being kept for observation, I said, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't scream. I'm staying here. The party's winding down, he said. Your dramatic exit was quite the topic of conversation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dramatic exit? I repeated. Mother says your parents tend to exaggerate. I mean, your dad's always talking about how fragile he is. Maybe this was just him being tired. You know how they get. Something inside me broke. Robert, I said, calm and cold, don't be there when I get home tomorrow. Wait, what? I'm serious. Don't be there. You're overreacting. No, I'm finally reacting. You let my father suffer to protect your mother's party, and now you want to gaslight me into thinking it wasn't that bad? I didn't mean. I hung up. For the next several hours, I didn't move. I sat between my sleeping parents, watching the monitors beep steadily. I watched my mother, who refused to sleep until she was sure my dad was safe. I watched the hospital staff, kind, competent strangers, do the job my own husband failed to do. Take care of the people I love. That night, something crystallized. This wasn't just about disrespect. It wasn't even about the party. This was about danger. My parents had been in actual danger because of the people I married into, and I could no longer afford to give them the benefit of the doubt. They weren't clueless. They were cruel. And I wasn't going to let it happen again. I didn't go home the next morning. Instead, I went to my best friend Vanessa's apartment, a modest but sunlit second-floor unit that had become my emotional safe haven over the years. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and didn't say a word. She just wrapped me in a hug and let me cry. I think they tried to kill my father, I whispered between sobs. Maybe not on purpose, but they didn't care if he got hurt. And Robert, he stood there and let it happen. Vanessa, an attorney specializing in family law, didn't flinch. She handed me a tissue and said something that changed everything. This isn't just betrayal, Peggy. This might be illegal. That night, while my dad was still in the hospital and my mother rested beside him, I pulled out my laptop and opened our joint accounts, something I hadn't done in weeks. And what I found nearly made me drop the computer. 3 days before the housewarming, Robert had withdrawn $38,600 from our joint savings account. No notification, no discussion, nothing. I checked the account history again, to be sure. Then I dug deeper. On our shared cloud storage, where we usually stored invoices and receipts, I found something even more disturbing. A scanned catering invoice for $22,000, billed not to us, but to Walter Cunningham, Robert's father. The line item? Private executive dinner, 40 guests, luxury menu and bar service. I felt the bile rise in my throat. He hadn't just spent our savings without permission. He had let his father throw a party in my house, using my money while locking my parents outside in the cold. My hands were trembling as I clicked through more documents. That's when I saw the draft renovation plans. They were labeled Guest Suite Conversion Project, Cunningham Residence. I opened the PDFs. There it was. A blueprint to convert the guest suite into a formal library, complete with walnut shelving and a hidden wet bar. Next to it, a second proposal. Convert my home office into a guest room for extended family stays. There was even a partially completed change of address form, listing Walter and Nancy Cunningham at my address. They weren't just meddling. They were moving in, on paper and in practice. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a long time. This was no longer a story about a party gone wrong. This was a coordinated campaign to displace me in my own life. Financially, emotionally, physically. I had two choices. Collapse or fight. I chose the second. Vanessa connected me with her brother's financial advisor the next morning. We spent 3 hours going through the accounts. The good news, he said, scanning my mortgage documents, is that you're the primary owner on the deed. Since you paid over 70% of the down payment and the mortgage is in your name, you have leverage. But you need to move fast. Next call, her firm's senior real estate attorney. Then, a family therapist, one who specialized in trauma recovery and high-control family systems. Every conversation made one thing painfully clear. What happened was not normal. Not the lock change, not the financial breach, not the passive complicity of my husband. It was control, gaslighting, boundary obliteration. And it wasn't the first time. The confirmation came via an unexpected phone call from Robert's sister. I heard what happened, she said quietly, and I'm so sorry. They did the same thing to me and James when we bought our house. They moved in after I gave birth and didn't leave for 8 months. Rearranged our nursery, changed locks while we were at the hospital, told James the first was too hormonal to make parenting decisions. I felt sick, and Robert knew? She sighed. He watched it all happen, said it wasn't his place to interfere. That call snapped something into place. They didn't just hijack houses. They colonized them through guilt, wealth, and emotional manipulation. And Robert? He wasn't just a bystander. He was a facilitator. Armed with evidence, I scheduled a locksmith and, on Vanessa's advice, a police escort. The officer was polite but firm. If you're the legal owner and someone changed the locks without your consent, you're well within your rights. The locksmith worked fast. Within 30 minutes, every lock and code had been replaced. I stepped into the house, my house, and stood still. The aftermath of the party was mostly cleared, but the air still smelled like imported cigars and overpriced perfume. In the guest room closet, I found Nancy's clothes on hangers. Her skincare arranged neatly on the bathroom counter, a monogrammed robe on the door hook. In Robert's office, a folder labeled Home Improvements Executive Summary. And inside it, everything. Permits, contractor quotes, projected values. Not a single page had my name on it. I took photos of everything. Then I closed the folder, stood up straight, and realized this wasn't just war. It was invasion. And I was done playing the polite host. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, fitting, somehow. I stood outside my own front door with two people flanking me, a locksmith in a navy windbreaker, toolbox in hand, and a police officer with a calm but watchful demeanor. "This won't take long," the locksmith said. "Just tell me if anyone inside tries to stop you," the officer added. "You're the legal homeowner. You're covered." I nodded. My stomach churned, but not from fear, from clarity. I was done being gaslit, done being polite, done being patient with people who mistook kindness for weakness. Within 20 minutes, every lock was changed, every code reprogrammed, every point of entry secured. My home, finally, was mine again. I gave Robert one final courtesy. I didn't throw his things out. I didn't block his number. Instead, I had my attorney invite him and his parents to a formal sit-down, neutral territory with professionals in the room and witnesses present. They showed up late, of course. Walter grumbled as he took a seat, adjusting his blazer like this was a corporate negotiation. Nancy wore a blazer too, white, pristine, with a gold pin that probably cost more than my first car. Robert looked like a man walking into a disciplinary review, not a meeting with his wife. "My parents are here as a courtesy," Robert said, sitting beside them instead of beside me. I didn't respond. My lawyer opened the meeting. "We're here today to address several violations of financial trust, property law, and most concerning actions that potentially endangered the health and safety of elderly individuals." Walter scoffed. "Oh, come on now. Let's not turn a misunderstanding into a court case." My lawyer didn't flinch. "Mr. Cunningham, Peggy is the primary name on the deed. Her husband withdrew nearly $40,000 from a joint account without mutual consent, which was used partially to fund a private event held in her home against her express wishes." Nancy interrupted. "That event was elevating the space. We brought in people who could help Robert's career. You can't put a price on networking." My attorney raised an eyebrow. "You did put a price on it, $22,000 to be exact, and it wasn't your money." Robert shifted in his seat. I laid out the terms calmly. Full repayment of the withdrawn funds within 48 hours. Reimbursement for all medical expenses related to my father's hypothermic episode. Written agreement that no modifications, renovations, or events occur in the home without my written consent. Permanent restriction on unsupervised access by Walter and Nancy to our home. Nancy's mouth dropped open. "You can't be serious." "I'm not negotiating," I said. "I'm setting terms." Walter leaned forward. "This is blackmail." "No," my lawyer corrected. "This is accountability." The room fell silent. Robert finally cleared his throat. I didn't know everything about the money or the renovation plans. I thought it was just a party." I stared at him. "You thought they were changing the locks and converting the guest suite into a library for fun?" He didn't answer. My lawyer slid the medical report across the table. "Hypothermic symptoms. Cardiac distress, emergency hospitalization. This isn't a scene, Mr. Cunningham. It's a potential elder endangerment case." That landed like a punch. Nancy turned pale. Walter went red. "This could cost you more than money," my lawyer said gently. "It could cost you reputation, board seats, social capital. Shall we continue down that road?" Robert blinked. For the first time, I saw something like realization on his face. "We'll return the money," he said quietly, "and cover the hospital bills." Nancy gasped. "Robert, no." "Yes," he said. "We're lucky her father survived. What if he hadn't? How would that look for your networking dinner?" The room shifted. For the first time, he was standing between them and me. In the days that followed, everything moved quickly. The money was returned. The hospital was reimbursed. A new contract was signed, notarized, and filed. Robert began seeing a therapist, specializing in family enmeshment and codependency. He told me during one of our neutral logistics meetings that the therapist asked him when he last made a major life decision without consulting his mother. He couldn't remember. "She always made me feel like she knew better," he said, "that I'd mess it up if I tried on my own." "And me?" I asked. "What about trusting me?" He looked down. "I didn't even realize I was choosing her over you. It felt automatic." "But it wasn't automatic when you watched my dad sit outside in the cold." I said, "That was a choice." He nodded. "I know, and I hate that version of me." I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't even say I believed him. But I saw a crack in the armor, a glimpse of someone trying to crawl out from years of parental control. Still, trying isn't the same as changing. That's why I didn't move back in. I stayed at Vanessa's. I kept the house. I kept the locks. I kept my boundaries. But most of all, I kept my power. 6 months later, my life no longer looks like it did that night. And thank God for that. My father made a full recovery. His cardiac function stabilized with the right medication and follow-up care. And my mother, though still struggling with arthritis, now smiles more easily when she visits. Our Sunday dinners resumed. Not out of routine, but out of gratitude. We alternate between their ranch-style home and mine, and every time they walk through my door, I feel a flicker of quiet victory. Because now they walk into a home that's safe, physically, emotionally, and legally. The guest suite, untouched, ready, waiting. The kitchen? No longer a battlefield of social expectations and judgmental whispers, but a place where my mom and I laugh while prepping her famous roasted carrots. The public rooms that Nancy tried to curate like a hotel lobby have been replaced with family photos, warm throws, handmade crafts, and boundaries no one crosses anymore. Robert still lives elsewhere. That was non-negotiable, at least for now. To his credit, he stuck to therapy. Week after week, he cut off unsupervised contact with his parents. He admitted, in writing, to the financial misconduct. He took full responsibility, publicly. Even during the holidays, when Walter and Nancy tried to smooth things over by sending a check and a handwritten apology card, Robert returned it to them, shredded. "I get it now," he said. "What they did wasn't just meddling. It was abuse." That word felt like justice. Cold, sharp, accurate. We started meeting for coffee once a week. Neutral, public, emotionally uncharged. At first, we just talked logistics, bills, repairs, attorney updates. But over time, we began talking about us, not as a couple, but as two people trying to make sense of a shared history shattered by silence and betrayal. "I don't know if I deserve another chance," he told me once. "You don't," I said, "but that doesn't mean you can't earn one." And to my own surprise, I meant it. Because here's what no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't always end in rage or revenge. Sometimes it ends in clarity, in choosing yourself, in realizing you don't owe anyone forgiveness, but you can give it on your own terms. So no, we're not divorced. Not yet. But we're not back together either. We're something new, cautious, intentional, a work in progress that respects what was broken, even if it never fully heals. At work, I was different too. Sharper, more empathetic, more decisive. "I don't know what changed," my colleague Jordan said after a client meeting where I held firm against unreasonable demands. "You just seem more certain." "I learned that protecting what matters isn't selfish," I replied. "It's necessary." I started mentoring younger women in the office, especially those navigating toxic dynamics, whether at home or at work. I didn't share my story in full, but they sensed something had forged me in fire. And they were right. What happened that night? The cold lips, the locked door, The betrayal wrapped in linen napkins and luxury catering burned something down. But in the ashes, I built something better, something mine. As for Nancy and Walter, their social capital didn't survive the winter. The words elder endangerment have a way of sticking, especially in the circles they cared most about. Invitations stopped. Board positions went quietly unrenewed. Their carefully curated image of sophistication cracked beneath the weight of what they'd done. It wasn't revenge. I didn't need to take them down. They did it to themselves. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences. Now, when I sit in my living room, feet tucked under a blanket my mom crocheted, I feel peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is finally honest. This house is no longer a symbol of compromise or conquest. It's not a stage for performances or power plays. It's a sanctuary. For my parents, for my future, for the version of myself I nearly lost. And every time I lock the door at night, I know exactly who holds the key. Me. Family isn't about blood. It's about who opens the door when you're freezing outside. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's love, real love, for yourself and those who truly matter. And if someone forces you to choose between keeping peace and keeping your dignity, you already know the answer. Have you ever had to stand up for what you knew was right? Share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the light someone else needs. Like and subscribe if you believe boundaries are something to be proud of.